Start of segment. Okay, in this segment, we are going to be discussing external data sources. Where do you get data from, right? External data from that you can use to analyze the various things that we discuss in the economic models, right? So, quick relook at what we discussed in the economic model thing. We said basically that there are firms and there are households, right? We divide actually all the entities, business, the activities that are going on, economic activities that are going on, into firms on one side and households on the other side. So households are consumers; they consume, and the firms basically either produce or they trade or they store or they transport or they manage finance or something like that. Okay, so all those activities are going on inside firms, whereas the consumption activities are happening inside the households, and the interaction between the firms and the households are taking place in one direction, which means when the firms sell products and services to households, that interaction is taking place through the product markets, and the other side where the households are providing labor, capital or land to the firms, that direction is happening through the resource markets. So that is what we said is the basic economic model. Now, where exactly does data come into this, right? Where do you get data from? So, first place to look for, we said also that the government has a role to play in all this because they collect taxes and provide some public goods and incentives or transfers and so on. But the government also has a much bigger role to play, which is in terms of gathering data. Okay, so government provides information. This is a very, very important role of the government. So let's look at some basic sources of data that come from the government. The first, there are some sources of data that the government provides, which are infrequent, which comes once, like in the case of census, it comes once in 10 years. But so the last census was in 2011. In fact, the 2021 census could not be held because of COVID. But we have been having one census every 10 years ever since 2050s. I mean the 1950s, and the census basically is comprehensive. Comprehensive means every single household in India is covered. So they go knocking on everybody's house and collect data. So this is not sampling. This is complete data capture of every single household in the country. Okay, so that's called census. Similarly, there is a census on this side. This is for households. So census is done by households. Similarly, there is an economic census of firms, small firms, big firms, all kinds of firms. And this economic census again is comprehensive, which means every single firm is covered. Okay, so whereas the census is census by definition means that you cover everybody, therefore it requires a lot of resources and amount of time and money and all that. So it's done very infrequently. So census is done 1 in 10 years. But there are more frequent things done. For example, there is a national sample survey that is done more frequently, and there is a household consumer. So national sample survey, we have had 72 of them in the country since independence, and there is a household consumer expenditure survey that is done on the household side. Similarly, there is an annual survey of industries. Annual means every year. There is a survey of industries done every year, which covers firms. So this is a high frequency because it's more. When we say high frequency, it basically means relative to census. Census once is 10 years, whereas the annual survey of industry is annual. Here this is 10 years. This might be more often. Okay, so you're doing it more often. Of course, we will discuss that there are private sources of information that are even more faster than this. That means more frequency than this. So even three times a year and so on. But the government source of information, it's very difficult to get the government to do things in a time frame where you get things in 3 months, 6 months and so on. So you usually get information once in a few years, but not once in 10 years like in census. But these things are sample based. So the definition national sample survey, when you say national sample survey, it means sample. So there's a methodology to doing the sampling. It picks certain households. We will discuss how they do it, and they cover those households in great detail, right? But only a few households are covered, not all of them. Sample of households, and based on that you can form, statistics allows you to form a picture of the whole by doing sampling of the part. So you sample some and then use that to construct the picture of the whole, and it will have some error, but the error will be small basically if you do the sampling correctly. So government sources of information are very, very important for us. Just as an example of a government source of data, there is this thing called economic census, right? So I'm just showing you basically how what is called the schedule. Schedule means basically the form, how it is, how it looks. So this is the form that is carried by the field officer to fill data. So one row in this basically is one house. Okay, so you can see basically that it's got the census number for the house, right? So census basically, remember, census covers everybody, so that census number is there. House or structure, basically it could be a firm, means that there will be a firm. For the firm also there will be a structure, right? And then the name of the establishment's owner, the name of the owner of the establishment, how many members are there, what does the description, what does the establishment do. The reason why we are calling, sometimes it's using household and all, is because many of the establishments that we have are actually home establishments, because their businesses run from homes. So you cannot separate really the business from the household. That is an issue actually. What is the broad activity? So there is a 2-digit code for the broad activity. So there is indicator here. For example, if it is livestock, it's 02. If it's transportation and storage, it's 13. If it is education, it's 20, like that. So there is a 2-digit code that you'll enter here. There is a NIC. NIC stands for National Industrial Classification Code. So there is a code for that NIC code that comes. Then is it a handloom type activity, handicraft activity? What is the ownership structure? Is it a government, private, partnership? Is it a self-help group? Is it a cooperative, like that? Is it a male run or a female run? What social group? What religion? What is the nature of operation and all that? And how many people are employed? How many males are employed? How many females are employed? Like that. Okay. How many on hired basis, which means on contract basis? How many are not hired, which means that basically they're temporary. Like that, you write down all the things. That is one row basically gives you one establishment. Like that, there are many rows. So this is the schedule, right? This is how they collect information, and based on that information, some analysis can be given. Like the latest economic census report that we had, I put some charts from it to show you. So this chart on the left shows what is the percentage of rural establishments, how are they financed. So for example, in rural establishments, 72.7% of the rural establishments are self-financed. Okay, 10% are have assistance from the government sources, 2.4% have borrowing from financial institutions, that's how they are financed. Some of them are borrowed from money lenders, that's how they are financed. Some have got loan from self-help group, that's how. Some of them have got it from donation and all that. So majority of the rural firms are self-financed. In fact, if you look at urban, it's even more. 83.7% of the urban establishments are self-financed. So you can see how big the potential for organized finances, for organized lending or organized financing of firms, how big it is. Because most of the firms today are all financed by self-finance. So that is a scope for people to take money from elsewhere and expand their business. This chart on the right side shows how many establishments are there with 10 or more workers, right? So which states, what percentage of the establishments with 10 or more workers, how are they distributed? So you can see that a very large number of establishments with 10 or more workers are in Tamil Nadu. 14% are in Tamil Nadu, 11% in West Bengal, Maharashtra. So these are all these states here: Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Kerala account for 14, 11, 25, 35, 7, 42, 48. Half the establishments are in these states, right? And some states have hardly any, right? So you can see that. So that's what this picture says. So these very interesting views you get like this, which you can present also in a form of pie chart or some bar chart or something, but you get very interesting views of what is going on in terms of how establishments are formed and so on, using this economic census report. Similarly, if you take the annual survey of industries, I am not showing you the schedule because it is very elaborate. They collect a lot of information. So you can see some of the charts that have come from the latest annual survey of industries, 2022. This is it shows basically percentage share of major industries and total number of persons engaged in factory sector, which means how many people are working in factory sector. Okay, you take that set of people and you say how much of that, what percentage of that are working in food products. So you find 11% of the total number of people in factory sector are employed in food products, 10% in textiles, 7.5% in apparel, okay, 7.25% in metal, 6.5% in motor vehicle, 6.3% like this. So you can see the breakup. So some sectors are highly employment intensive, some of them are not so employment intensive. That's what this seems to show. Okay. Similarly, you can say where are the people, which states are the people who are working in factories, which states are they in? And you find that Tamil Nadu is one of the states which has a large number of people, right? So you can see that we have 2.5 lakh people working in factories in Tamil Nadu, whereas Gujarat is the next, and then Maharashtra, and then there are other states like that. So all this information has come out of from the annual survey of industries. Here is another one which says what is the aggregate GVA. GVA stands for gross value added, right? So a company might be getting all the components of mobile phones and then assembling the mobile phone in India and selling it. So we ask what is the gross value add of that assembly process. So it might be only 4%, because when it sold 100 rupees worth of mobile phone, 96 rupees it may have gotten components, PCB, plastic, everything it may have imported and added 4 rupees worth of value and sold. So in that case, the gross value added is only 4 rupees, even though it sold 100 rupees of phone, only 4 rupees is the gross value added. So we calculate exactly the value addition due to a process, right? So if you look at it like that, you find that chemical and chemical products is adding 11.17% of the total value is coming from there, 10% from metals, pharma is 8%, food products 8%, motor vehicles 7%, like that. Okay, you can write down the gross value added. This is another very interesting outcome of the annual survey of industries. Now, the NSS, the National Sample Survey, what it does basically is it divides. So based on census, again, you can divide the country into various census blocks, right? Regions, and in each of those regions, basically you create, you pick a sample, right? You pick some, and when I come to this, later on when I discuss one of the surveys in a little bit more detail, I'll explain how these samples chosen very carefully. But you pick from each of these regions, you pick a sample, you pick some people, and then you do some estimations. In this case, the NSS 72nd round, the National Sample Survey 72nd, focused on two areas. One is how much do households spend on services. Services means like transportation, education, healthcare and all that, okay, business services and so on. And how much do they spend on durable goods? Durable good means refrigerator, air conditioner, things like that, okay. So these charts are basically about transportation. So we are seeing basically that we have looked at the rural and urban. So this chart is rural, this chart is urban. The data is presented in this form, right? So we have divided the population into 5 what are called quintiles, which means you are saying the top and based on their quintile class based on their usual monthly per capita expenditure. So somebody who is spending, so you basically calculate the total expenditure of the household and you sort all of them, and the people who fall in the top 20% of expenditures, they are in the top quintile. People who in the bottom 20% expenditures, they are in the bottom 20% quintile, and the others in the middle somewhere, okay. So the top quintile, I mean top 20% of the total spenders, right, expenditures, with the top 20% of the highest expenditures, in some sense monthly expenditures, if you look at their expenditures, you will find basically that their biggest source of expenditure seems to be on bus. So they are spending about 180 rupees on bus, right, monthly. 180 rupees on bus, and this blue line first one is railway. They're spending about 40, because maybe from Bombay or something they travel by train, right, or metro or something like that. So 50 rupees they are spending on railway, 180 rupees on bus, and taxi some amount, and then all the auto rickshaw and others. Whereas if you take the bottom quintile, they are hardly spending any money. So you can see basically that even these people, the bus is the biggest form of transport. It's about 30 rupees. But if you go to rural areas, even the top quintile, if you look, right, they are also spending the most amount on railway, on bus, sorry. Their bus spending basically is 80 rupees compared to 180 rupees. Here it's 180, here it's 80. So the top quintile in the rural area is spending 80 rupees on bus, whereas the urban area they are spending 180. Here there is not that much scope to spend on railway, I think, because railway train may not be going to all the rural areas and all, so they are not spending much. But this person is spending because of metro train and because of local suburban railway and other things. Okay, so you can see these kind of very interesting consumption patterns that come out by analysis of the data that comes out from the National Sample Survey. Okay. Besides those data sources, which data sources? What I explained, the census, the National Sample Survey, the census, economic census, annual survey of industries. Besides these, there are many other government sources of data also that are available. For example, you will have tax data, right? You get very fine grained data of GST by different types of products and services, which give you an indication of which products are being sold in which region in the country, right? The Reserve Bank of India and the stock exchange, they give you a lot of information on capital raising and lending and everything else. Okay, there is a thing called the Periodic Labor Force Survey, right, PLFS, which tells you what is the employment that is happening, how many people are getting employed, how many people are out of labor market, how many people, what wages are they getting employed at, where are they getting employed, that kind of thing you get from PLFS. So you will get a view of the labor market. How many licenses are given, how many road transport licenses were given, how many driving licenses were issued, all this kind of information you will get, right. You will get wholesale price index and consumer price index. So the total, how is inflation, how is the price of general products and services, how is it moving? Right now it looks like tomato and many other things, the prices seem to be going up, so that will inflate the consumer price index. And of course people can always, through this thing called right to information, you can always ask for more information from the government. Nowadays the government publishes everything. In fact, I want to show you this site which is called data.gov.in. I'm not sure whether you can read what I have typed in the URL, but I have typed data.gov.in. So the idea basically is that the government is saying that they want to make as far as possible all the information available publicly, either for you to look at or for you to even access through APIs and do your own analytics, right? You can generate your own charts. So, so they are saying basically that now they have so many resources, 623,000 resources. How many times it's been downloaded? 9.79 million downloads they have got. So, you can see basically that you can discover it by sector, by groups, right? Whether it's central government or state government, you can write your own APIs and access it, and all the data sets are there, right? So health and family welfare, agriculture, census and surveys, water and sanitation, statistics, education, water resources, transport, finance, government, plenty of data. Okay, all the data. Of course, you will have to log in. You have to create a registration, login, and say why you need this data. So there is login, register. But by and large, you can easily register, and you can get hold of your your data. For example, this UDICE is basically a education database that is there here. Prison statistics, budget for sports, how much was given, like that. So they have tried to make available every possible data that is there in different ministries. They are trying to make available in a central place, so it becomes a lot easier for you to access it. So you don't really, right to information is there, but nowadays it's not really required to do right to information, because even without right to information, you can actually government is making everything available, so you can just go and get it. Okay, so besides the government sources, okay, before I go on to non-government sources, I want to talk about this thing which we talked about here, which is a periodic labor force survey, PLFS. Okay, so here is an example of a chart which comes from the latest 21-22 periodic labor force survey. This relates to something that I had said earlier also. You just look at in rural and urban, how are the people employed. So you find basically that 54% of the people in rural areas are self-employed. They are not working for any company. Okay, only 13.8% are getting regular wages or salaries in India. Okay, 25.2% are casual labor, which means they get paid daily wages. And in the urban area, 33, this is 54%. In the urban area, it has reduced, but still it is very large. 33% are self-employed. Self-employed means like hawkers, dhobis or something like that. People who are basically doing their own business, self-employed. Okay, and in the urban area, 43% are wage earning, regular wage earning. In the rural area, it's only 13.8. Of course, one should expect that if you're having a farm, you're more likely to be self-employed, but still this number is very, very small. Okay, and even in the urban area, 43% being organized and the remaining being self-employed or unorganized is not very good. I mean, we need to have more people organized. 11% are casual labor, and 12% means basically daily wage labor, and 12% are others. Sometimes in work, sometimes not in work type of thing. Okay, so let me move on now to the non-government data sources. Now, there are many places from where you can get non-government data sources. One of them is, for example, there is a index called Purchasing Managers Index, which basically gives you sentiment analysis. What are firms doing in terms of buying? Are they going to buy or not buy? That kind of decision. It's called Purchasing Managers Index, and if it shows some number above 50, it means that firms are optimistic about the future. If it shows a number below 50, it means firms are pessimistic about the future. But we are not discussing that right now. The main focus for us will be data that comes from this organization, which is called the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy. This is a big provider of data for a lot of companies, which basically then use it to make decisions, strategic decisions. That is why we are interested in CMI data. So we will primarily focus. So CMI produces two kinds of data. As we saw in economic, what we said earlier, you either look at this side or you look at this side, right? So if you, this side basically is households and their consumption, this side is about firms and their investments. So the CapEx report of CMI tells you which sectors firms are investing in, whereas the consumer pyramids household survey of CMI tells you what households are buying or intend to buy. Okay, so we will be mostly focused on this. In fact, I will show you what they do, how they do the survey, and in the next segment we will actually take the data that has come from the survey and go through it in great amount of detail. Okay, so that you get a feel for what is going on. So the consumer pyramids household survey of CMI, this picture snapshot was taken August 21st, very recently, in some sense, from the date of recording right now. Okay, so basically we are saying now that 236,000 households. So right now the wave that is in progress is 29th wave, which will go from May to August of 2023. The response rate at this point in time is 62.99%. So what they basically have found is that on the average, they get about 73% responses, which means that if they go to a house and try to get a response, many of them may not be there, house will be locked, there will be reasons, but they have been able to get 63% of the houses, they have been able to get some response, which is very good actually. This kind of response rate is extremely good. So 236,000 households were surveyed. It's a longitudinal survey. Now, there is a very interesting, this longitudinal survey is a very interesting kind of survey. It means that the same households you will go to again and again. This is very important because if you go and do a sample of 10 people in this round, and in the next round you do another sample of 10 people, and there is no relation between this 10 people that you sampled this time and the 10 people you sampled next time, then you don't know how consumption pattern has changed over time, right? Of course, you will get some broad aggregate picture, but if you go to the same household 2 times, I went last year I went again this year, and I found in the same house, last year they were consuming so many liters of milk in a month. This year they are consuming a little bit more milk every month. Then it gives you a more definite confirmation that this house basically is moving up the economic ladder or something like that. Okay, in the sense that they are consuming more products which are as income goes up, you will start consuming certain kinds of products like milk and so on. Protein products will get consumed more, meat and all that will get consumed more. So you can confirm that, right? So it's firstly longitudinal, which means the same houses are visited again and again. Secondly, it's a fast frequency survey, which means that you're surveying. Remember, I told you census is done once every 10 years. These other things are done a little bit more often, but here you're doing 3 times every year. So you're doing 3 surveys every year. So that's why it's called a fast frequency survey. Now, what are the different kinds of things on which data is collected? One is called the People of India database, which basically tells you the attributes and peculiarities of Indian people. Not that interesting for us. The second thing which is of greatest interest for us is the consumption pyramid. Which means what did they consume in the last 1 month? Okay, this is called the consumption pyramid. The third is aspirational data. What do they want to consume? They are not consumed the last month, but they are looking forward to buying something. Like for example, they want to buy a refrigerator, they want to buy a car or something like that. Normally you don't keep buying cars, right? You buy a car, then you may not buy a car for another 15 years. So asking them question about whether you own a car, that is coming here, but do you what do you intend to buy a car in the next 3 months or something like that? That question is asked here. And then income, right? What kind of income do they have? How is the income changing? What is the volatility of income and all? That is the income pyramid. So in the subsequent segments, we are going to focus quite a lot on these two data sets: consumption pyramid data set and aspirational India data set, because one of them tells you how they are spending their money, and this one tells you what are the things they would like to buy, right? So that tells you that. So what exactly do they do? How do they do their survey, right? So first thing they do basically is they identify what are called primary sampling units, which are based on the census, right? How the census is done. Remember, census covers everybody. So based on that, they can choose the primary sampling units, and they group. So then from this, they create something called a homogeneous region. Okay, a homogeneous region is a set of neighboring districts within a state that has similar conditions. So relatively similar urbanization levels, similar female literacy, similar size in terms of households as per 2011 census. The idea being that if you take 2 regions which are very different from each other in terms of either size of households or in terms of literacy rate or something, and you try to randomly sample, you may get a biased sample. Okay, but if you take a homogeneous region, it means a region where all the districts in that region basically are roughly alike. So it doesn't matter whether I choose from here or choose from there, I'll get the same result. So take a homogeneous region, and from that region you choose a sample, and make sure that all the homogeneous regions, different homogeneous regions, are all represented. So that is basically how this sampling is done. So bias is removed because of this concept called homogeneous region. So you can see how the homogeneous regions, how the households are split across various things. So rural homogeneous regions, on the average 634, the very large towns like this, medium towns and small towns. How does the split up? Okay, what is the min, max, average number of households picked? So they have basically ensured that you are picking households from across the spectrum, all the strata. You are not picking it only from rural, only from small towns or something like that. Everything is covered. State wise also there is some distribution. So you can see basically that how many towns are covered. In Andhra Pradesh, 14 towns were covered, and how many households were covered. 5,000 households are covered. How many samples were taken and all that, right? So you can see that. So it's basically covering everything. All right. So with that, we come to the end of this segment. So so what we are learning from this segment basically is that we can use surveys of various kinds. Some of them are government has done these surveys and calculated. Otherwise, these private agencies like CMI has done surveys, and these surveys basically generate data, and this data is of use to us to do some charting, like we saw, to get some insights into what is going on. Okay, so in the next segment we will go deep dive into some of the survey data and try to get some really deep insights. Okay, hopefully you will find it interesting. Thank you.